Hey everybody, I have Tiffany White on the podcast today, and she is wonderful. If you're a part of the writing community on Twitter, I don't doubt that you've seen her. She does editing on as a business, which I think is amazing. So she's an author and editor, and she recently secured an agent. So that's a lot of what we talk about. So if you're in the querying process, she's got some really great tips, and it's always good to hear other people's stories of that journey because it's hard and everybody's journey is a little bit different, right? So it makes you feel good no matter what happens to you. Tiffany is pretty wonderful, so let's go ahead and get to know her and hear all about her journey. Tiffany, could you tell us a little bit about you and what you're working on and, your journey to getting signed by a literary agent?
Yeah, so I majored in screenwriting in college. So I started off in college majoring in screenwriting. I, had this goal to be this big screenwriter in Hollywood, but I quickly learned that breaking into the industry is super hard, and I was living in LA in a little tiny 2-bedroom apartment with 5 people, which wasn't even allowed.
Oh my
but
gosh.
We had to have 5 people. I know, it was awful. Yeah. But we had to have 5 people because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
And we were all waitressing during the day and doing internships that you don't get paid for. Just trying to break into the industry, and I just quickly realized I just kind of couldn't handle it. I had a few things where I got close. I had producers who were interested in my screenplays, but, it never panned out to anything. And I was like, I just can't keep doing this. I want to have a job where I can have my own bedroom. I can afford, my own bedroom. So I got into teaching then because, I don't know, for some reason teaching just seemed like a stable career to me, which is a horrible reason to get into teaching. But I was like, I just want a job where I have a salary and health insurance, and it's stable, because I figured, they always need teachers.
Yeah.
When do they not need teachers? So yeah, I got into teaching, and I really took a break from writing for quite a while I was teaching, but it was fun because I got to travel, and I feel like I grew up and I had a lot of life experiences, and it was great. And then I met my husband, and I let him read one of my screenplays, and I was teaching at that time, and he was like, you really need to turn this into a book. But I was like, a book? I don't know how to write books. I learned how to write screenplays. Right. I don't know, how to do this. But he kept kind of persisting. And at the time, I was kind of becoming more miserable as a teacher. And so finally I was like, all right, I'll try this book thing, And I turned my screenplay into a book. And I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever written. I was like, this is just amazing. And it wasn't. It was awful. And I feel so bad for those people who beta read for me initially, because they were probably like, oh God, how do I tell this girl she has no idea what she's doing? But that was around the time that I joined Twitter. And I actually joined Twitter because I was hoping to connect with other teachers, because I was so miserable teaching. And I was like, maybe if I connect with other teachers and start, doing all this stuff, I can love it more. But instead, I ended up finding a teacher who was a writer. And I followed her, and I just fell into the rabbit hole that is Twitter. And it was crazy because it's this underground society, when you don't know about it, it's how has this existed this whole time? And it's this huge thing, and I wasn't even aware of it, and I mean, it could have done wonders for me probably when I was 21 years old and wanting to quit. So yeah, and I learned a lot. I connected with a lot of writers on Twitter, and on Instagram, and I just started learning a ton about writing. And so I queried that first book 30 times, and I got 30 pretty quick rejections.
Right.
Not shocking. So yeah, I went on and I wrote a second manuscript, and it was way better than my first one, but I still had a lot to learn. So I wrote it, I got beta readers, I learned a lot from them and their comments, and then I think I pitched it at a conference. Like I went to the Writers Digest conference in New York, and I pitched it. But I just kind of realized, as I kept learning more, I realized it just wasn't where it needed to be to get an agent. So I shelved that one. Then I started writing another manuscript, and I wrote the whole thing. I was going to submit it to Pitch Wars, but after I wrote it, I just realized that it was missing, like the character arcs. Like my character didn't change, didn't grow, didn't learn any lessons, but it was a lot better technically. Like I had written it really well, but it was just missing like a really essential, story plot, I guess. So I shelved that one then, and I was like, that one needs to be completely rewritten. So at that point, I'd written 3 manuscripts, and all of them had been shelved, but they were all like really great, like learning process for me. I learned a ton writing those 3 manuscripts. So
right.
It was really valuable for me, even if I had to kind of shelve them. And they were all fantasy. They were all YA fantasy. So at that point, I was like, that had been a year. I had written 3 manuscripts in a year, and I don't know. I think it was because I didn't write for like 7 years that I just like had like all of these like ideas building up and like all these words just like ready, So yeah, I was just burned out at that point, and I was tired of writing fantasy. So I was like, I'm going to take a break from writing. And at that time, I had decided to open my own editing business as well. So I was just doing like a ton of work for that. And I was taking classes to get certified in copy editing. And I just had a lot going on. So I took a break from writing. And while I took a break, I came up with this idea for a YA contemporary, which I'm all about fantasy. I really had only read fantasy. And I just thought that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to write fantasy. I read fantasy. But I came up with this YA contemporary idea, and I was like, well, I need to read some YA contemporary if I'm going to write one.
Right.
So during my break, I devoured like just as much YA contemporary as I could to just kind of get a sense of like the genre and, voice and tone and all that stuff. And then during Nano, I wrote this YA contemporary, which is basically a YA retelling of A Christmas Carol. And so I wrote it, and I felt pretty good about it. Like it came a lot more naturally than I thought it would. And I think it was just so much easier because it's like you don't have to worry about the world building as much that you do in fantasy and like a magic system.
Yeah.
It's like readers know what like a fork is. Like you have a fork in a YA contemporary, and readers know what that is. Like you don't have to make up all these things and like explain. Like so it was a lot easier for me. And I sent it to betas, and like they didn't have a lot of feedback, which was for all my YA fantasy that I had written up to that point, I just always had a lot of feedback, which was good. But it just meant I had like a lot of rewrites to do and things like that. And for this one, I just really didn't have to deal with that. Like they had very little feedback. And so I felt like pretty good about it. Like it was ready to query pretty quickly. I think I finished it during Nano. Betas got me feedback by like December, and I was ready to query by like mid-January maybe. So, I started querying it. I pitched it at a conference, and I got a full request, which I was super excited about. Like, she was just really excited about my idea. And then that ended up being an R&R. Like, she emailed me back, and she gave me some really good feedback, but I wasn't quite sure how to implement that feedback. And so I was like, I just need to set it aside for a little while. It's hard when you get R&Rs because sometimes if you don't know how to implement the feedback, then it's like, well, does this mean everybody's going to feel this way?
Right.
Like, should I stop querying now and wait until I figure this out? Or do I keep querying and just, and basically her feedback, because it's a Christmas Carol retelling. So my main character is a teenage girl. She's basically like a mean girl,
Yeah.
Who has quite a lesson to learn. And so she's not very likable. And that was kind of the agent's feedback, was like, she's not really likable, and I feel like she needs to be more likable. And so that was really hard for me, because I was like, but that's the whole premise of the book. I don't know,
right.
So I was just really struggling with that. But I was like, but what if she's right and everybody feels this way? So yeah, I stopped querying at that point, and I think I counted, and I think I sent out 27 queries total at that point. So I was like, well, I'm just going to stop and take a break and let this kind of like ruminate a little bit and try and figure out if I want to do a rewrite like that or what. And in the meantime, Savannah Brooks from JD Lit emailed me and had a full request, so I sent that to her, but I didn't really get my hopes up because at that point I was feeling a little defeated
right
after that R&R, and I was like, I'll send it to her, and at the very least maybe she can get me some good feedback about this. And so yeah, then she ended up, I think it was 2 months later, 2 months had gone by, so at that point I really didn't have my hopes up, but I think I had unrealistic expectations. I think 2 months is actually really normal.
Yeah.
For agents, to read manuscripts. And so, yeah, 2 months is, like, not a big deal or anything. But, 2 months go by, and then she emailed me and said some really nice things about my book and said she wanted to, schedule a phone call with me. And so I still didn't want to get my hopes up because, I think I definitely did some research, and there are people who said, a phone call can still be a R&R, a
right.
revise, a resubmit. So I was like, I don't want to get my hopes up about this. She could still be asking me to revise. But yeah, she called me, and it was just a great phone call. And she gushed about my book, and like, who doesn't want to have somebody?
Yeah.
Like, that's the best thing when somebody's just saying all these nice things about your book.
Definitely.
So she offered me representation, and then, I had 2 weeks to reach out to other agents and let them know about the offer, which definitely I know that's recommended because agents, they might not have gotten to your manuscript yet, and so they want to know if you have an offer so they have a chance to be able to, say if they want to read it or whatever. So ultimately, I decided to sign with Savannah. Just her passion for my book. I know people always say, like, find an agent who loves your book as much as you do, but I honestly feel like you need to find an agent who loves your book more than you do.
For sure.
I was like, I love this book and all, but she, like, really loves it, So yeah, I mean, it was just, she was so passionate about it, and I just knew she would be great. And it wasn't just that book, but, like, she was passionate about representing me for my career, which was really important to me. I didn't want it to be the type of thing where it's like, you just want me for this one book, and
right.
then I write other books that you might not, like or whatever. So it was definitely something where I felt like that she was going to do that. She was going to represent me for my career and not just this one book. So yeah, that's like a little mini history.
I love it. I mean, I think there's so many important things to, note, like how you had to write like a few novels first before and learn through that process, which I think we all do. I think we all have shelved manuscripts that we're like, okay, there's so much work that needs to be done to go back and fix that one. Like, I have one that was like my, first one that I really finished, that I love the story, but there was a lot functionally wrong with it. And so I think, anything gets better with practice, but especially writing and going through that whole process of writing a whole novel. But I just, I'm so excited for you, and I love the, I've seen you post about the book, the Christmas Carol retelling, and it sounds amazing. So I'm so excited for you and Savannah to work on that together.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. And I mean, I think you're right. Like, but I think it's also hard to hear. I mean, I know when I was writing that first book that I saw people say that on Twitter, and I would see some agents would say, like, if this is your first book, I might not be the right person for you, which I know some people do get their first book represented. I know that. But I think even as I was hearing that, I was like, no, like, this is good. This is really good, So I think that can be hard to hear too sometimes, but it doesn't, I mean, I think you always think that book needs to be the one. Like, it's like, I don't know what I'll do if this doesn't sell, but like, it's just, you have so many stories in you, everybody does. So,
right. Well, because it can feel like the book of your heart while you're working on it. And it takes a while for you and some space for you to be like, okay, like, that was a good journey and a good story, but like you said, you have more in you. And I think I did the same thing. Like, I queried that first novel that I'm so sorry for any agent who had to see that. But, you know, it's like, I think we all have to go through those experiences too, just to kind of be leveled down and brought back to earth a little bit. Like, okay,
right.
Here we go. We need to actually rethink what we're doing.
Right. I'm not the next J.K. Rowling after this first book.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Probably will not ever be the next J.K. Rowling, but that's fine.
That's all right? What would you have any like top tips for writers who are in that querying process right now or who are about to start querying?
I think self-care is really important, definitely. And I think it's important to I know it's so hard to hear this. It was for me, and to like internalize it, but it really is so subjective, you know, and like getting rejections is not a reflection of your writing skill or how good your story is. I mean, it's so subjective, and I think at least I could see how subjective it was when I participated in RevPit as an editor, and for this competition where, you know, people submit to win basically like a full developmental edit. And I mean, I got like 100 queries and first 5 pages, and a lot of them were just so good, but like I just didn't connect with them. Like the writing was amazing, the story was amazing, but I was like, I'm just not connecting with this. But it you know, it didn't mean that it wasn't amazing. So I think that really helped me understand, but I know that when querying, that can just be hard, and you can start to kind of doubt yourself and doubt your writing. But I think my top tip would be don't doubt, you know, make sure you are just employing self-care, because that's really important.
And I feel like I've seen a lot of, you know, things on the Twitter community, which is like a beautiful, safe place to be when you're in that process, about that. Like I saw an author who was talking about, you know, she went on Sub, she sold her book, and the day they sold her book, she got a query rejection.
Right.
So it's like, it is so subjective, and it is so hard to hear and really think about. But I mean, as you go into the querying and publishing process, you know, traditionally and you know, self-publishing too, it's more of a business, and you have to think about it more of that, whereas writing the book is so personal. So it is it's a hard transition to make, but I think that's really important, because you want it to be subjective in a way, because you want to, like you said, find an agent who loves your book as much or more than you do.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point about the business part. It's like putting on that business hat, you know, and I think when you're querying, it doesn't feel like a business yet, you know, but it really is. I mean, at that point, when you're putting yourself out there to get an agent, you're representing like your business and like your brand and yourself. So I think that is a good point. I feel like the business talk doesn't come in normally until your book sells, but it really starts, you know, way before that.
Oh yeah, way before that. And I think it's good that to help transition yourself into thinking business when you're in the querying process, because it can take the sting out of it. You know, when you get a query rejection, you can just be like, okay, they didn't connect with it. That doesn't mean my writing's terrible. They just literally didn't connect with it, because they have to sell it. They have to be as passionate about it as you are, and that can, you know, you want them to be that way.
Yes, that's so true. You want an agent who's gonna be happy to be reading your book over and over, and who's gonna be putting, you know, and they're gonna have to pitch it, so they have to really love it to be able to do that. So
yes, it is. I mean, we all have to go through it, except sometimes I've had authors on the podcast who are like, I didn't even have to send a query. I'm like, what? You lucky person.
I feel like that's definitely the exception, not the rule, but that's amazing. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I know, right? I want that to be my experience.
Right. And I mean, I know, like, sometimes I feel a little guilty, because I'm always like, you have to persist, you have to persevere, and I know my querying journey was actually pretty quick compared to some people, but I think that also, I guess another tip then going along with that would be just don't compare, you know, because everybody's journeys are so different, and of course getting an agent includes skill. Like, you have to have a good book and, you know, writing skills, but I do think it's a luck too. It's about sending it to the right person at the right time when they're not representing any other book like that, or the market is trending towards that or whatever. So I think it definitely includes luck as well.
Unfortunately, it does include part luck.
I know, which that part's frustrating because you want it to just all be about your skill.
Yeah.
But that's why it's like about persisting, because it's like if you persist, eventually it will happen.
Yes. And I think I can't remember. I always see these things on Twitter and then I never remember who it was. But there was some author who is really big time. Her books are so successful and people love them. But she sent 500 queries, So it's definitely persist, because, unfortunately, and that's what I love about, talking to different authors on the podcast, is you get to hear so many different crazy journeys to where you are right now with an agent and working on things, and it definitely helps, I think, me at least, not to compare. Everybody's journey is so different, so just be happy and try to be as impatient as possible in your own.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. I agree. Everybody's journey is just so different.
Very. But we can all still support each other, which is what I love about our little writing community.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it's okay to have those feelings. I know, when people would get agents and whatever, it would be you feel you're happy for them, but you're also jealous. Right. And I think it's okay to let yourself feel that, it's natural. But yeah, it's also important to just be supportive and be a part of the community, because it is such a valuable resource.
Yes, and it's such a great way to make connections, and you never know who's going to like it and retweet it and who will see it. So I think it's real good. Well, my next question for you is a two-parter. I'd like to know what the hardest part of writing for you is, and then what the hardest part of being an author is for you so far.
Yeah, I think maybe they're similar. Being a writer, the hardest part of being a writer and an author, for me at least, I know I worry about everything, and so a lot of it for me is that self-doubt. And just doubting, is this idea really a good idea? Or once I write the manuscript, I don't know if this is very good. And it's just I feel every step of the way. And I feel from people I've talked to who are published and who have multiple books out, that doubt never goes away.
Yeah.
It's just, and I think the important thing is not letting it stop you from, pursuing your dreams or from writing that book or whatever. But the doubting is definitely hard for me, and going along with talking about comparing yourselves, I think sometimes that can make you doubt even more, when you see a book sell or something that's similar to your book, or you see just all these different things, it contributes to the doubt. So that for me is probably the hardest part of writing.
I think doubt is something, and it goes along with that imposter syndrome, which I oh my gosh, it hits me so hard sometimes, and it's a really hard hole to crawl out of. And I think it's just, knowing how to take care of yourself, and seeing those things on, that your friends are doing, or, just random people. I think you want to be supportive and happy for them, but also if you need to step back and not go on Twitter or not go on Instagram, do it, because if that's going to help keep you in a healthy spot with not being drowned by the doubt, that's really important.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I agree. I think definitely sometimes I need to take those mental health breaks, and I need to take a step back. There's too much is going on Twitter right now. It's not good for me, so I need to take a step back. So yeah, it is good to recognize that too, and to not torture yourself and just keep, digging yourself deeper into the Twitter hole when it's I should probably take a break.
Right. Well, on the flip side of that question, what's the best part for you of being a writer?
I mean, I think it's just definitely being able to tell the stories that I want to read. A lot of these those first manuscripts that I wrote, the fantasy ones, they were all just stories that I would want to read, and I just think that's so cool that you're getting to create worlds and characters. I don't know, it's just such a cool thing where you grow up reading all these amazing books, and then it's you're creating those books that you would want to read. And I think it's also cool thinking about you know, like with my YA contemporaries, I have like really snarky characters, and I like to kind of be funny. And so I always love, you know, when beta readers or whoever, it tells me that they laughed a lot, because it's like, that's so cool that like my words made somebody laugh, or that somebody might be having a bad day, and like what I'm creating could make them happy, you know, or can make them like feel better about their day, or can make them forget that the horrible thing happened, you know, at work or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. It's a really, really cool thing. It's like you're not to be over dramatic, but it's like you're changing lives a little bit. You know?
You are, yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the best thing. It's just fun, and it's so much fun getting to do it. I remember when I was teaching, and I was just really, towards the end of teaching, I was really miserable, and it was like every day I looked forward to getting to come home and just write, and like me just writing would help me forget about my bad day.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cathartic in that way too.
It's super cathartic. That's how it all started for me, was just like a very therapeutic process of like, I remember reading and having those same experiences, like laughing and feeling like pulled out of like my really stressful childhood. And I was like, I want to do this for somebody else. But then it, you know, that desire to do it for somebody else just turned into me like being able to escape from the craziness in my head and my life, which I think is good on both sides, for the reader and for the writer.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about your writing style. Are you more of a pantser, more of a planner, or somewhere in between?
I'm definitely a planner. I've always been. I cannot pants. Like, it would stress me out. I think that's like the anxiety part of me. Like, not knowing where the book is going would stress me out, because I'd be like, how do I know I'm going to be able to finish this? Like,
right.
How do I know, you know, like, where is this going? I don't understand. So yeah, I'm definitely a planner. I love Save the Cat. I think Save the Cat is awesome. And I don't know, it works for me. Like, I like the formula. I guess I shouldn't say, like, it's so, like, convincingly that I'm a planner, because I do pants a little bit, but, like, I like to plan out all the major plot points, you know, according to, like, Save the Cat, like, the beginning and the midpoint, or the, I'm, like, losing, what's the word? The inciting incident. There we go.
There you go.
All those good things. So, like, the major plot points, I like to just have those plotted out. I definitely need to know where the story's going. Like, I need to know how it ends, so that I have a goal in mind. And then I can usually just pants, like, the individual chapters, like, how do we get from the inciting incident to the midpoint?
Yeah.
As long as I know where I'm going, then I can kind of pants in between. But I do like to really plan it all out before before I start writing. It just helps me.
I mean, I think that you know how it works best for you is the most important thing. Sometimes I started out as very much a planner, and then I felt like trapped by my like super clear outline, you know, so then I wrote a book as a pantser, and it was super freeing experience, but I had so much editing to do, like crazy amount of editing. So just finding what works for you is great. And I love that there's, you know, freedom in what you have to write. But I feel like if you wrote fantasy, you would definitely need to be a planner because of the world building and the magic system and all of that.
I don't know how you could pants a fantasy novel.
No.
Like, I just don't. I'm sure people do it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there are people out there who do it. But yeah, and I mean, you really like hit the nail on the head, because that's the thing. Like, if you're a pantser, you're just going to have more rewriting to do
so
at the
much.
end.
Yeah.
But I mean, I not always though, because I do know, like, as a plotter, you know, I plotted out an entire fantasy novel. I thought it was airtight, you know, wrote the whole thing, and then at the end I was like, oh my god, there are so many plot holes. How did this happen? Like, I plotted this whole thing. How did this happen? So yeah, I think sometimes as a plotter you have to do as much rewrite as a pantser, depending on if you didn't plot very well.
Yes. So. Well, I just love to know how other people do it. You know, I think sometimes if people are stuck in a moment, or, you know, with a story, it can be helpful for them just to hear, like, oh, how does somebody else do this? Because, like, first drafts are the hardest thing. I haven't written a first draft in, like, 2 years. I have been working on other projects and revising and stuff, and I'm working on one right now, and I'm, like, dying at the blank page,
Yeah.
you know? I'm like 25,000 words in, and I'm like, how do I do this again?
Right. And revising is hard. I know, like, I have 4 shelved manuscripts right now that all need to be revised, and they're all fantasy. I don't know. It's so weird how I read. That's all I read. So you would think I would be great at writing fantasy. Like, what is happening in this world? So, yeah, I don't know. For some reason, my fantasy novels are just not cutting it. They're just not working out like they need to. So, but yeah, they're all shelved because revising can be so overwhelming depending on what you have to do.
Yeah.
So,
I think my struggle with revision, I sometimes don't know when to stop. Like, I'll revise and get through one and be like, okay, this is pretty good, but like, then I'll sit on it and think about like 12 more things I have to do, and that happens every single time I revise it. And then it's a completely, like I've had one that became like a completely different novel at the end. I'm like, should I have stopped like a few revisions back?
That's what happened with my book that got me an agent. Is I had finished it, it was done, I didn't have a lot of beta feedback, but then I thought of a new idea for it, and I kind of started implementing the new idea, and I realized as I was implementing it, I realized it was just a completely different story, and I was like, this makes no sense. Like, I'm not even making this story better.
Yeah.
I'm just making it into a completely different story. Like, I might as well just write a completely separate book, because it's not. So I was like, this isn't really revising. Like, I'm going to go ahead and stop.
Yes. So it's like, you got to know when to just like put the computer away and let your novel just be.
Right, which can be hard, especially when you're querying. I know, and the rejections come in, and that can be hard. But yeah, you have to just like trust in yourself and trust in your book.
Which, and that's where the doubt comes in again.
Right. Yes. It's a recurring theme.
Yes.
For sure.
So what does your revision process look like? I mean, before, is there anything particular that you would go through and look for? I mean, being an editor, you probably have some good insight now on what to do. So maybe just share like your top things that you look for.
Yeah, I think becoming an editor, especially a developmental editor, and just, reading just so many manuscripts and developmentally editing them, it did help my revision process. But the first thing I always do is take a break. I know Stephen King said in his book to take like a 6-week break from your manuscript, which can be like so hard to even think about. Like, how can I take a break for 6 weeks from my baby? But I don't do that long, but I normally take about like a 4-week. Like, I try and take a month away from it just to give myself distance. And I do whatever I want in that month. I might take a break from writing, I might start writing something new or whatever. But then when I come back, what I'm normally looking for when I revise is scenes or chapters that like don't move the story forward at all. And so I'll just kind of go through and hopefully at that point, you're reading it with fresh eyes. I know after about a month, that's like how long it takes for me to kind of be able to go back and read it with those fresh eyes.
Yeah.
So that it's easier to see those things. But yeah, that's like my biggest thing that I'm usually looking for. And I mean, I also, there's like AutoCrit and Pro Writing Aid that kind of help you go through and you get rid of the filler words and, all that kind of stuff. So I clean it up line editing wise. Like, I'm looking for like repetition, things like that. But yeah, I'm really kind of looking at like the story, the overall story, and that's always really helpful for me, is just going chapter by chapter, scene by scene, and saying like, how does this move the story forward, or like, what's the purpose of this scene? And I make sure that there's conflict in all my scenes, and I make sure that the tension and the stakes are rising throughout the book, all those things. And that's before I send it off to beta readers.
Which, beta readers are like, I want to give all of mine like gifts and all the love in the world. They're truly a wonderful part of the revision process. What would we do without them?
Oh yeah, no. Oh my gosh. I would not be anywhere without my beta readers. Yeah, they have helped me so much. And they are like, extra fresh eyes on they're always going to spot things.
Yes.
At least mine do, that I would never have thought about. So yeah, beta readers are amazing.
Yes, I do love them. So back when you were just telling us about, your like journey through writing and all that. You said you wanted to be a screenwriter, which is so funny because that is definitely what I wanted to do. I was in high school and I was like, I'm gonna be win an award for being a screenwriter. and I wrote a couple screenplays because they're like so easy to write if you think about it, because you don't have to have like a lot of the exposition and description that you do in a novel.
Right.
But I would just love to hear like how that love of writing and how it moved into screenwriting began for you.
Yeah, I mean, always loved writing. I don't know, as long as I can remember. I can't even remember really like the first time I wrote anything. It's like always been a part of who I am. And so I got like really involved in theater in high school, and I got to this point where I got like the opportunity to direct my own play, and I was like,
awesome.
Yes, and I was involved in like a lot of writing clubs and things like that. And so somebody suggested to me like, well, what if you like wrote and directed your own play, like instead of just picking, because like the theater teacher had like all these different plays you could choose from, like that you could choose to direct. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that would be interesting, like writing my own play. And I knew nothing about playwriting,
right?
But I decided to like give it a go, and I just realized I really loved it. And then at the time I was like really involved in my church. This was so random, but I thought it would be really fun. I would always go to church on Sundays, and like the readings would like go over my head, like they were hard for me to understand, and so I like suggested to the priest, I was like, what if like once a month, because every week would have been too difficult for me, but I was like, what if like once a month, like I read the readings that you're gonna like talk about in your homily, and I create like a little play out of the readings.
Ooh.
And like make it like modern day,
yeah,
so that it'll be more easy for like the teenagers and the kids in church to like understand what they're saying, like what the message is. And he like really loved the idea. So for like a year I did that, where like once a month I would turn these like readings into like a play, and I recruited like teenagers from the church to act in them. And so like all of that combined like made me realize I really liked that sort of writing, where I could just write the dialogue and the action and things like that. And so when I started applying to colleges, I had my heart set on NYU. Mm-hmm. I was going to go to NYU, the Tisch School of Art.
Yeah.
And I was going to be a playwriter. And so I applied. I didn't even apply to any other colleges. Like, I was like, I'm so sure I'm getting in. I'm not applying anywhere else. I know this is like my dream. This is what I'm meant to do. And so, of course, I got a rejection from NYU. And I was like so brokenhearted. I was like, I'm not going to college. I'm just going to stay here. And I'm going to be a waitress at Lone Star Steakhouse. And, I'm just like not doing anything with my life. I was being very dramatic, and I was very upset. So my sister had a friend who went to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and I guess they have a really good film program. And she's like, well, they don't have a theater program, but they have a film program, and they have a screenwriting major. And, my mom was like, screenwriting's close enough to playwriting. And I was like, it's not the same at all. But she was like, it's the same. You're applying. Like, she basically made me apply. And I didn't want to at all. I was like, I don't want to go to Los Angeles. I wanted to go to New York. Like, that's where I wanted to go. But, like, my mom was like, no, you're applying. Like, you're doing this. So she forced me to apply. So I did. And then I ended up getting in to LMU. And into their screenwriting program. And yeah, that kind of introduced me to like the whole world of screenwriting, because before that I was really into like playwriting. So yeah, and it was really cool. I mean, I loved it. I'm so glad that that's where my life went, because it was really great. And it taught me, just being in that screen and film school taught me so much about like story structure,
right?
And dialogue. And I mean, I did make a lot of connections, and it is like my absolute dream is to have one of my books optioned for film, and to be able to write my own screenplay. Like, that would just be
amazing.
Goal.
Yeah. That would be so cool. I love that. My high school, they did they had you submit a play that you had written, and they put on a play written by a student. Mine didn't get chosen,
so
but
cool.
it was such a cool exercise because it was right in that mode where I was like, oh, I want to be a screenwriter, and I was like, oh, playwriting, this is so fun. I love that there's so many different, ways of storytelling, and that, it led you to where you are now. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, there are so many different avenues for storytelling, and it is cool. It's really amazing because it just gives everybody kind of an outlet, to choose from.
Yeah, super good. Well, Tiffany, I have one last question for you. It is my favorite question because we're all lovers of books, but it is, what is your favorite book right now? This is not your favorite book of all time. This is just a book that you've read recently that you really enjoyed and stuck with you.
I know, this is such a hard question.
I know.
I have so many. But, okay, so the most recent, I'm just going by the most recent one that I loved was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin Craig. And I don't know, I think it's because it's fall, and I'm just in such, and I don't even like horror. Like, horror is not my thing as much, but I really am in a mood for spooky.
Yeah.
And like gothic, and I don't know. It's just, that's like all I want right now. So that House of Salt and Sorrows, it's just like this really like spooky kind of YA novel set in like a seaside manor.
Ooh.
It's a retelling, I think, of the 12 Dancing Princesses, I believe. But yeah, it's so good. It's just about this girl, and she has all these sisters, and they keep dying basically. And it's, I don't know, it's just like spooky and atmospheric, and she has to figure out what's killing her sisters before, it gets to her.
Wow.
So, I don't know. It was just an amazing book. I read it in like 2 days, and then I immediately wanted to reread it. So
That's awesome. That's when you know it's a good one.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. I have definitely seen that one on Twitter, and I just have, I like all of us do. I have way too many things to read, but I love asking this question and adding to my list.
I know, and it's so, I feel guilty because my mind is just reeling with all the other books, and I'm like, oh my god, there's just so many, but it's okay. I can just choose that one.
Yes, no, it's fine. This is just your favorite book right now, so, it's not all-time list, which is a question that I would never be able to answer. My husband is he's like, what's your favorite book? I'm like, ever? I'm like, I don't know. How is anybody supposed to answer that question?
Right. It's not answerable. Yeah, no. If you had asked me that question, this would be like a 2-hour long podcast of me just talking about all the books that I love forever and ever.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a podcast all on its own, just us talking about books that we love.
It could be, and I would totally be down for that.
That would be fun. Tiffany, thank you so much for chatting with me today and sharing all about your writing journey and your writing process. It has been a pleasure to chat with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Again, thank you so much for listening. Please remember to rate and review, share. I love to hear what you guys think about the podcast. So connect with me Instagram and Twitter @RoseQuinny, QUINNY. Thanks so much.